the network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the inaugural episode of the Power Over Ethernet show here at AVNation. Wanted to welcome everybody. I'm going to ask, since this is our first show, that you guys would show a little bit of grace for those of you who are watching or listening as we try and find our way through this process. The Power Over Ethernet show, what is it? This is a show where we're going to discuss bits, bytes, frames, and packets. More specifically, we want to talk about how they relate to the AV and controls industry. How important is the network today in our systems integration jobs? So my name is Anthony Zotti. You may know me from the DIY show here. I'm an AV and automation professional. I generally work in the residential market and have for about 15 years with a little bit of crossover here and there into some light commercial and some building automation. And joining me tonight are a couple of very well experienced nerds. The first is Jim Stolzenbach. And Jim, I'd like you to go ahead and introduce yourself if you don't mind.
Well, I'm another AV guy who started out doing cable. Like, I'm the cable guy at 18 years old. Went into security, got hooked up with a residential company who basically did phone and cable and structured wiring, and that's it. And from there, I kind of helped them get up to doing TVs back when plasmas first came out. And then we went into doing Elon back in the day and up to RTI, and we transitioned to another company, and now we're doing full automation network, Crestron, Control4, Bluetron, all this stuff. So I've got the organic kind of like learning process of, oh, I have to figure out how to make this work next week.
Yeah.
So, y'all know how that goes.
I'm glad you're here, Jim. Chris, if you'd like to introduce yourself as well.
Sure. My name's Chris Nicholson from RLC Integration. Most of you guys know me as Springs or Got Springs. It's a nickname I got from volleyball. Just a 5'8" guy who can actually dunk. They always go, hey, that number 12 has got some springs. And it's a much better nickname than, hey, dickhead or jerk off or something like that. It's a lot easier to remember. Now, as for getting into this industry, I guess I was that kid who, when he was 8 years old, was standing at Circuit City, and they said, we don't have the right cable to connect that. And I actually unzipped a zipper on my jacket, pulled out a coaxial cable, and went, do you need this? So I've been kind of around this stuff my whole life. My dad had a pair of Bose 901s he used to swing from the ceiling. But anyway, I went to college and majored in history, believe it or not, and kinesiology. Those are two things I never use. I was working as an EMT for a while, and one day someone pulled a gun on me at work. And I determined at that point, if someone's going to point a gun at me, I want to be able to point one back. So people always go, you spend all that time with biology, anatomy, working in hospitals and stuff, and now you work with electronics. How do you justify that in your head? Said it's really easy. No one bleeds on me, no one shits on me, no one spits on me, and you know what? I really have to fuck something up before someone dies on me today. So it's a lot less stress in this job.
I just realized, I'm so glad you're here. I just realized why you were adamant that Jim would have to be here to help moderate you, Chris. I'm really grateful to have the two of you together. For those of you who are just joining us, I was getting to hear kind of the story of how these two cats had gotten together. They're both local to each other out in Maryland, and it's kind of interesting how one complements the other. That's for sure. One complements the other here. Okay, so now that we've had a colorful introduction, guys, once again, why do we want to do the Power Over Ethernet show? Really, this first episode is just to give you guys an idea of how important we feel the network is in our systems. It's become a critical part of everything that we do. We are pushing streaming video. We are pushing streaming audio, AirPlay, you name it, over our systems, which are high bandwidth, usage. We're sending our control signals now. So we're actually, from our control systems, obviously controlling different devices that, for all intents and purposes, just live on the network itself. We have constant ongoing maintenance. We have upgrades. We have security issues that we need to keep track of. And we need to be able to do a lot of that remotely. And so in thinking about this, one of the things that's really come to my mind is that there's a need for how do I want to describe it? There's a need for a higher skill set within our industry that's network specific. Our AV and controls, we tend to be a lot of generalists, but there's definitely room for folks to specialize, and networking is definitely one of those areas that you can do it. I personally work for a large integration firm out in Colorado. We have some 135 employees. We do millions of dollars of business, and I'm working into a position where the network is the only thing I touch. That's my specialty, and that's kind of where I wanted to come in on this. But it doesn't matter if you're a VoIP technician, if you're focused on wireless or routing and switching or anything like that. There's definitely room to grow. And I wanted to invite these two guys who have been in the trenches and are doing this on a daily basis to just kind of join me and help those of you who are joining us, understand what it is that they do, what we do every day. Guys, do you have any comment on why people should listen to the show, or what you bring to the table?
Go ahead, Jim.
Well, I would say it's really becoming essential that you have to have at least a base knowledge of certain things on how to, maybe not how to, tweak networks or anything like that, but you need to be able to connect your computer to somebody's network in their house, and if you're not getting online, be able to figure out why, or if you need to set up an access point or something like that, you need to know how to set your computer to a static IP, whether it's Windows 7 or 8 or XP or a Mac. You almost can't get by without knowing how to do that. Like our kind of, I'm going to say our junior techs, but they're only junior in the computer side of things. They're really good at everything else. We've basically trained them to how to open up a FiOS router to remote admin and call us after they're ready to go.
Mm-hmm.
Here's my WAN IP. Okay, let me know when you're done. And that used to be a truck roll. That used to be me going out to do that. And it could be an hour away, 2 hours away.
Mm-hmm.
And didn't take that long to train them. It really doesn't. But you have to be willing to kind of try and grasp the abstract concepts that are going on, because it's all abstract unless you know how to dig into the troubleshooting tools. It's just, do I have internet, do I not have internet? Okay, well, you need to go about 100 levels deeper than that with what we're doing. But there really is like a basic set of skills that almost everybody working at the back end of a job needs.
Absolutely. Before I bring you in on that one, Chris, I was going to ask, do you talk to, as you described in these junior level techs, about troubleshooting concepts or fundamentals, or working their way backwards up through the OSI model or anything like that?
To be honest, a lot of times they really don't want to hear it when I start trying to explain it. So a lot of the times it's really, we use microtick routers is a big one for both Jim and I, as Jim has networking for integrators, where he's tried to G-rate some of my cussing and swearing as I tried to teach him over the years. In fact, if you look at that website, the first comments is always me going, Jim, you forgot to hook up the doll, which is not a sexual reference, but a reference to weird science when the missile comes up out of the floor because they forgot to hook up the doll.
Uh-huh.
Which is kind of what happens every once in a while when Jim goes off on his own little tangent and doesn't talk to me until afterwards. But anyway, circling back to that, we picked microtick specifically for a couple reasons. Number one, the ability to look into what's going on in the network at the router from off-site. And this is huge. That completely allowed us to remove a lot of truck rolls. Now, with the addition of things like web power over Ethernet, to shut devices on and off as you need to, having basic web GUIs to just cut stuff on, Blue Bolt, whatever you want like that, you can solve something like 90% of your phone calls with a reboot half the time. I mean, how many times have we heard, oh, reboot it and see what happens?
Yeah.
Well, adding devices that can do that for you are very helpful. But then having a router where you can actually go, okay, I'm going to log into the router and I'm going to use the router to troubleshoot what's going on in the network. Okay, I try and ping a device, it doesn't respond. Well, it might be offline. It's a pretty quick thing to troubleshoot at that point. Or you could say, oh, well, I can see right here there's nothing plugged into port 4. So that's where my access point is supposed to be. Would you mind plugging that back in for me? That would really help with making your wireless work better. And why exactly were you unplugging these things?
Yeah.
And the absolute number one thing that Jim and I always loved about this product is, what we really like about this router is if you walk up and you have enough nerve to go in there and pull the power plug, hold down the reset button, and plug it back in, the router makes a complete backup of itself exactly how it was at that second.
Yeah.
So we can walk someone who has no idea what they're doing over the phone in a couple seconds to rebuild thousands of lines of code. It'll bring back their their loop that makes their web cameras work. It'll bring back all of their schedulers that make their time servers work. It'll bring back up their thing that makes Unify call home. Like all these things can be brought back with maybe 20 seconds on the phone with somebody after you've gotten them to admit that they screwed up your router. Because at first they lie to you. They're like, oh, nothing's happened. Oh, really? What's your IP address? 192.168. You jerk, you lied. And we can get them defaulted from there and back to reasonable in what, 5 clicks, Jim? Is that about right?
Sure. Yeah.
Log into the first page, go to Files, go to Backup, click Restore. Boom. It's back and running again. You cuss them out and you charge them whatever you charge them for that.
Sure.
But anyway, that's a big deal. It's just having that minor thing. But like I was saying before about the ability to actually troubleshoot, being able to check your routes, being able to see whether or not a host is unreachable. Like people are like, oh, my internet's down, but you log right in. Well, your internet's not down. That one porn site you're going to might be offline, and that ain't our problem, okay?
Yeah.
But being able to check that stuff directly at their line is very helpful for us because, like Jim said, it prevents truck rolls.
Yeah.
Truck rolls to the point where, Anthony, you said yourself that you're only touching the network side of it. Jim worked on, what'd you say, a school in Africa or something, asked you for help in setting up their routing? You didn't go to Africa, did you? You ain't no Dave Chappelle on me, did you?
Nope.
Well, no, and that is one of the things that leads me. I obviously, as you guys know, I'm also a proponent of the Microtech product and use it extensively, which is funny because I'm sort of embedded here in the midst of a very profitable Cisco shop, and what we're finding is that more and more some of these unheard of brands are coming in and performing at such a high level and at such a low or it's certainly acceptable cost. You can do amazing things with it, and it's kind of made me sort of the other here in the shop, but we're just finding that we don't have to roll trucks on our networks. It's very, very rare that we have an issue that we can't address remotely. Like you were saying, Chris, to be able to be inside the network and be able to poke around just using the terminal that's available to us in the router, which of course you can do with other products as well. It's not Microtech specific, but that's one of those things that's been a big help to us, as well as, like you said, the scripting engine is ridiculously powerful.
That is true, and I was just thinking with the ability to write macros and stuff to, like, for instance, a real common thing I write is something to go check and see if you can reach Google out Ether 1. If you can't reach Google out Ether 1, flip to Ether 2. Keep pinging out Ether 1 and don't allow, pings to Google to go out Ether 2 because, well, you never know if one was back up again.
Yeah.
Even while I've got my DLI, my $155 web switch, which might I add, ended about 90% of my phone calls. Because every time it would rain, I'd get phone calls about every cable modem. And what does that phone call sound like? Okay, go down to your basement. Yeah, I know your cell phone doesn't work down there. There's a bat phone on the wall. That was my smartest invention ever. I put a $10 plastic phone on the wall right next to the router. So I had them take that phone off the hook, call me back from there and say, okay, you're going to unplug this, do a little hokey pokey, and you spin yourself about, basically make them wait 60 seconds. And then once they did, their system would come back up again. Well, once I could script that into DLI to say, shut down outlet 1, count to 70, come back on, I stopped having a talking to people. And I don't want to talk to them.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant stuff. That's what this show is about, is those kinds of ideas and how powerful that is to be able to do that from the router.
Well, if I could also ask about the thing that Jim said before, when he said that you have to have a basic understanding of this stuff. When I first started working on the network side, I was mostly an integration guy. I was doing the interfaces for the touch panels. And you'd walk around the house and you have 3 access points to cover 4 devices. And you were big ballin' 6 years ago if you had 4 wireless devices in your house. Oh my God! Look at today. You have 4 wireless devices on your person. You've got your notebook, your iPad, your phone, and then some whatever. But then you go into the actual home theater room. You've got the receiver, the Roku, the Apple TV. I mean, I've counted 15 devices in the room that are plugged into the network.
Sure.
And that was the moment when I went, okay, I can't be playing around with AV automation anymore. I've got to be on the network side of it.
That's awesome. That's a revelation. I'd like to hear more about that. And just what did that look like for you then when you made that decision? How did you act on it?
That's not a G-rated thing. You ready for it?
I'd ask that you at least try.
I'll give it a shot. All right. So Jim's seen me, and I'm not a big guy. I'm about 5'8", and I'm mostly skin and bones. But let's just say the computer nerd who was the network engineer at the company was one of those guys you saw on Saturday Night Live. You don't know how to do that, just obnoxious as you can imagine. So I politely walked over. I said, okay, I think here's the problem. Here's what you need to do. I need this thing fixed. And he's like, well, no, you should do this, or you should do that. And I was like, oh, God. And I sat down next to him. I said, I finally figured out the problem. He said, what's that? I go, I finally figured out what's wrong here. He's like, what are you talking about? I go, you have clearly forgotten what high school was like, where people beat the ever-loving out of you every day, and I'm about to remind you. And I grabbed him by his collar, and I picked him up and carried him outside by it and threw him in the mud in front of the job site. So, of course, he got up, picked up his stuff, ran away, and never came back. So the owner of the company looks at me and goes, well, do you think you could do that better? I said, send me to class, and let's find out.
Sure.
Well, we never called that guy back again. So it was mostly, I hated that guy so much, I'm like, I've got to just at least get this guy fired. But then once I actually got into it, it was like, this stuff is pretty interesting, but it's also become the thing that you will get calls on Friday night. So if you guys remember, it used to be when the Super Bowl was about to be on, you got calls. And a week before that, you got calls, hey, could you just come out and check this over and make sure it's okay? So once the network became the thing that people kind of made it's like your plumbing. It's quite literally like your plumbing in your house. No one gives a damn about it until there's poop all over your living room floor, and then it's, I need this fixed right now. So I'm just a digital plumber. And the fact of the matter is, if you have pipes made out of paper mache, you're going to have all over your floors every day. That's all there is to it.
Fair enough. And Jim, what about you? How have you started to fall into that sort of specialization, or how did you determine that the network was going to be a critical part of what you do in this space?
I don't really think I had a choice. I mean, we were doing RTI like maybe a year after the XP8 came out, and that was a network piece, and didn't really do much on the network with it at all. But around that time, our company merged with another company, so we were going through a big transition. But we picked up Control 4, and that's IP-based product. I mean, you can't. It's as important as the power supply. The network switch that you put in there. Even if it's just a little $40 network switch, it can't be. It can't be going out, because if it goes out, you might as well have unplug the controller. So it's a kind of out of necessity. You get thrown into situations and figure out how to make it work, and then you figure out where the point of failure is going to be.
Absolutely.
That's story. I mean, I could relate that to every thing I've done in this industry, but that's just where it is right now. I mean, it's got to work. It's got to work point A to point B. If that doesn't work, it's not hooked up. It's not going to. And it's going. The worst part is, like if you get an access point and you have it hooked up with a DC power supply instead of over POE. And you lose the wired network connection. Now you got an access point sitting there broadcasting the same network as the other access point, and the customer's like, I don't know what's going on.
Yep.
Now, if you know what you're looking for, it's not that big of a deal, but...
Ruckus meshes. Save my boat when that happens.
I know.
Crappy POE injector on your thing broke.
Right.
And then, guys, so that's an excellent example of like one of those gotchas, I always relate that to, I wish that my clients knew the difference between Wi-Fi and the internet. I'm not going to hold my breath on that. But there's a number of different gotchas that are out there. So can you think of, one or two other gotcha type issues that you guys run into on a regular basis?
The I didn't change anything? That's always my favorite.
Now, Chris, are you working with clients who would have a reason to actually change stuff? Like, do you have clients that are actually touching configs, or?
For the most part, the touching configs, that only happens when the brother-in-law, the boyfriend, or the kid comes home from college. Mm-hmm. That's when that happens. But you know what? I have a sign. You guys remember Liam Neeson and Taken?
Yeah.
I don't know who you are. I don't know what you want. I don't have money, but what I do have is a very special set of skills, skills I've acquired over a long career. And while I can't offer you money, I can guarantee you this. If you touch this and you call me, I will help you. But if you don't, I will pursue you. I will find you, and I will kill you. And I have that printed at a lot of my job sites. It has my phone number at the bottom. And believe it or not, a lot of Verizon techs have called up and been like, yeah, it says to call this number before I swap the router. Who is this?
That's actually a good one. You know, when we're dealing with the service providers and they're coming in and touching our racks and our head ends and our, in some cases, structured cabling enclosures, it's not a bad idea to have that warning in there because you can almost guarantee that they're going to brick your network.
Well, that's one, but the other one is I also do commercial networks for like restaurants and so forth. And you always get the bartender or the drunk patron who does this on the side.
Uh-huh.
And they want to get in there and play with it. And you kind of got to make that thing as intimidating as possible. And I got to tell you, a black 450G in a case with absolutely no explanation for what it is, with a few blinking lights, that'll scare most people. And the fact that you have to pull it out of the rack to get at it to even hold down the reset, you've given yourself another layer of security. So these are just things we think about.
Yeah, that's sort of that security by obscurity. That's one of the things that I like about the networking products that we use is, you know, there is no web GUI. I'm not going to offer you a web GUI, and so the experts that come into a client's home, or in your case, I come into a restaurant or whatever, the first thing they're going to do is try and hit that web GUI, and they become absolutely baffled when they can't actually get into the device that they're wanting to monkey with. So.
Well, see, that was a great idea that Jim gave me, the blacklist that we were talking about when that guy was trying to break into your router at work.
Yeah.
So what I did was basically if you try and hit the web GUI, you get 2 attempts. If you log in twice, it will ban you, kick you off the wireless, and make you stay off the network for 6 hours.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's something you can easily do in scripting with MikroTik, with a, you know, $65 router. You know, and that's the thing. We use that hardware because to do that in other hardware platforms would cost way more. And when you talk about like obscure products, just because your vendor pushes it on you, like your Avid, your ADI or anything, doesn't mean it's worth a crap. It just means that they got a good spiff off of it.
Uh-oh, someone else got bit by Luxel.
Yeah, well, no, not me personally, but...
no, but we've all heard the horror stories.
Well, not just Luxel. I mean, there are quite a few other things that they put out there that they expect us to just sort of take because, well, they tell us, and, you know, they make 30%, and they expect us to make 5%, and we're supposed to thank them for it.
Yeah.
So now we've inherited the problem. When there's a problem in the field, does the vendor help us? No. Does our distributor help us? No. So suddenly we're left holding the bag. And like the conversation I had the other day, I asked the person, I said, why did you sell this? He goes, well, I really like the margin. I'm like, you made $135 on it. You've had 3 truck rolls, and you've had to go back and, like, you know, rework the system for 2 hours. What's your time worth? What was that $135 worth to you? Because I'll tell you, that customer's not referring you for a network thing anymore. I'll tell you that.
Correct.
And that network being down, like Jim said, it shut down their control system, it shut down their HVAC, it shut down their lighting. So all those things remain static. You know, they couldn't do anything with it. It's not like went into a, you know, emergency services sort of thing, but, you know, they couldn't adjust their lighting. Their lights were stuck at full on everywhere in their house.
Yeah, that's critical. That's a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
So guys, if I pushed you into a corner and you were talking to folks who are interested in the networking end of things, what would be the 1 or 2 things that you would encourage them to do to get started on that path to, say, just improve their skills or possibly specialize in networking?
I can tell you that picking up MikroTik has forced me to learn a lot that I didn't really understand, and there's still a ton I don't understand completely, but I don't need to for what I do.
Mm-hmm.
But, I mean, the reason I picked up MikroTik was actually because Chris was working on it and started a thread on Integration Pros, and it's funny because at the beginning of this huge, massive 100-page now thread, I was at the beginning going, oh, I don't need to learn that, I don't need another product. At the time, I was doing Netgears with DDWRT on it, and like 20 pages later, I'm starting a website like explaining how to use MikroTik, right? But I like it. I like to just dive into things. Now, obviously, you can't do that on a job. You have to kind of take it home and play with it or whatever. But it forced me to go, what is it doing when I click that checkbox in this other product? I have no idea. I'm clicking a checkbox, hitting apply, waiting for the page to refresh. Mm-hmm. Okay, I guess it's doing it now. Well, with MikroTik, it's like, oh, look, there's like counters and graphs and things of that rule I just made, you know? And now sometimes, I mean, most of the stuff that I need to do is not complicated, and if I just stop and think about it for a second, I can do it in a minute, like literally like 60 seconds, and it works. And that just comes from digging into the product, you know? Everything else was, you know, the transparency of MikroTik is what I really like about it. It's, you know, it's a great troubleshooting tool. But with the other products, you're just, you know, click. Is it doing it? Yeah, I think it's doing it. Okay. So I just like to jump in.
What about you, Chris? What would you encourage folks to do to get started?
Rule 1, break shit at home. Don't do it in customers' homes, because no customer likes being a guinea pig. They hired you to be the expert. You don't start playing around with them. If you let them know, if you warn them and everything, I mean, I've had that awful talk with customers be like, look, you are my guinea pig. We're going to be trying this out on you. You saved a lot of money by buying this over this. You know, your old house had this stuff and it worked 100% of the time. And he's like, yeah. And I said, this stuff costs 1/3 as much, but you are the guinea pig. So when it breaks, you're going to call me up and you're going to tell me politely that I've got a problem. Because if you call me screaming just one time, I'm dinging your card for the whole price of the other stuff and I'm swapping it out that afternoon. No ifs, ands, or buts, because I'm not going to listen to it. Now, in moving back from that, when I say break stuff at home, buy anything your bosses will let you get a hold of, honestly. Seriously, try it out first, because if you don't know how that thing functions and you put it out in the field, you're going to be the one who's got egg all over your face when it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And if it's a core component product where everything in the house relies on it, you better make sure you can hit that thing with a hammer repeatedly before it breaks.
Yep.
So that's my main advice.
Yeah, and that's not just hardware. That's the software end of it as well, you know, and becoming familiar with it. Well, you know, I'd back you guys both up. I feel the same way on both of your points. One, a home lab, I think, is critical. I think it's playing with the gear in your own home, whether you're actually running it as quote-unquote production in your own home and letting your family be the guinea pigs is going to be a lot safer than letting your clients be it. But I also, for example, in my own home lab, I have my own network so that my family can keep, you know, streaming their Netflix or really most importantly leaving me alone. I have my own, you know, basic subnets that I can play around with, and I do a lot with the wireless end of things. So I've got gear from many different vendors that I can play with, and like you said, Chris, break. And then Jim, I absolutely 100% agree with you. MikroTik has been an absolute revelation to me, you know, and yes, I'm admittedly a fanboy, and no, this show isn't about MikroTik, but it's amazing how many times it's come up in this show. It's sort of like, well, it is Linux. It is Linux under the hood, but it's a lot like learning Linux is going to force you to learn a lot about general computing concepts.
Right.
Whereas some of the, you know, the commercial software or commercial OSs, they just, you know, it's just a pretty skin over the top of everything. You don't need to dig in. MikroTik allows you to dig in a comfortable way and really start to focus on fundamentals and understanding. For example, you know, I brought it up earlier, that OSI model, which I think is probably the first thing that I share with the young kids that I get to work with in a company this large, where I talk to them about learn it. You know, you're never going to really have to in our space. I don't expect these kids to go above layer 3, but you better know those first 3 layers and what they are there for and what their jobs are and how to use those as troubleshooting tools.
Right.
Yeah, is it plugged into power? The chances of it working increase by a factor of 10 if you apply electricity.
Agreed.
Well, going back to the testing things in your own house, one of the things I always got caught with was we set up a little test area at our office, and we'd bring products in, like, man, I really want to try this out, and I would bring it in, and I would hook it up, and I'd be like, oh, this is cool to mess with it for, like, you know, 4 to 6 hours, and then I wouldn't touch it for weeks.
Sure.
And then management's like, oh, can we put that piece in like a month later? And I'm like, ooh, I haven't really tested it yet. And they're like, well, it's been a month. I was like, yeah, I haven't looked at it since then. So I mean, if you're going to test something, you got to really, in your home is big, but you have to actually use it in the way that you're going to implement it in the field. I mean, and you got to do it like, you got to live with it. I mean, you got to live with it, just like everything else in here. But I don't know how many products I've, you know, the rep's been nice enough to drop off, and I plugged it in, left it on the counter, and a week later he was like, hey, did you get a chance to play with that? I'm like, well, I plugged it in. You need it back? Yeah, I need it back. Okay. So.
Yeah, but when it comes to the whole thing of playing with it, I think that you really have to figure out the absolute worst situation you can figure out and apply it immediately, like as hard as you can, as much as you can.
Right.
See, Jim's been over to my house. I live in a pretty new development, and you know, Jim looks around. He's like, "How do you live in a place like this?" I'm like, "I married a doctor, bitches. There you go." But the thing is, my environment. If you're standing in my living room, you can hear, I kid you not, 62 broadcasting wireless access points.
Unbelievable.
From my living room. Now, I've used my in-laws because they're surrounded on 3 sides. I'm surrounded on 4 sides, so my interference is way worse. But what I'll occasionally do is when all the neighbors decide they want to come over and have a few drinks, which I happily provide, I also provide them internet at the same time, which allows me to see just how badly I can load down an access point. So when I talk to other people, they're like, oh yeah, well I tested this thing out at home. Like, how long did you test it for? Like, oh, I tried it for a week. How many devices do you have on it? Oh, about 9. Well, I'll invite over 150 people and put them all on my Wi-Fi just to see what happens.
Yeah, that's a stress test for you.
Well, that also determines what I think will be just fine in a restaurant environment or in a home, because since I work in the DC metro area, occasionally I've set up things that end up being in embassies and things like that, where suddenly you have, 8 or 9 devices on your day-to-day network, but suddenly when everybody comes over with their BlackBerries and they're checking their email all night, I log in and I see, 300 devices on my network. Well, you know what? A Class C network only has 255 spaces to start out with, so you're going to have to make a bigger address scope just to handle that. And forget just the hardware being able to deal with it, but just not having enough physical numbers is the first step that you have to deal with. And like you said in the OSI model, these are things that we'll start to learn, like, oh, this is Class A, this is Class B, this is Class C.
Absolutely.
Well, I can have 255 addresses. I can have 16 million addresses. Well, there's quite a difference between those two.
Agreed. And, that's an interesting thing, about the work that we do. We may have a full rack dedicated just to the network, and in some of our jobs we do. We'll have a 7-foot rack that's all it is switches, routers, wireless LAN controllers, the whole shebang, and patch panels, lots of patch panels. But you know what? In the residential and even light commercial space, we're never seeing some of the huge loads that we're seeing people do in like the enterprise space, or for example stadiums and things like that. So we're not talking about you have to get to that level, but to be good in our industry, you do have to have these basic fundamentals, and you do need to treat, for example, in the residential space, in this day and age, if you're not treating that home as if it is a small to medium business, you're doing that client a disservice. You're not going to get away with using $69 consumer grade gear, particularly for the wireless, and expect good results. You have to use a little bit of forethought, and it may not necessarily even be price related. I mean, taking us back once again to Microtech, but it definitely has to be solid, and it needs to be tested, and it needs to be treated like a small to medium sized business, if not a small to medium sized enterprise.
Wait, is $69 the retail price of a UAP? Is that right? Is that what that was?
Yeah. I think they're 59 actually. But you know what? UAP is another thing. That's wireless is going to be a whole nother show. Wireless could be an entire season of shows.
Be a whole other show, not just an episode, but
exactly.
a whole show.
Absolutely. But you're talking about, you're seeing 62 competing networks, wireless networks from your living room there, Chris. That's where the areas where integrators need to start being aware of the difference between a 2.4 and 5 gigahertz band, and why 2.4 is junk, and where you can use it effectively, and where you've got no business even speccing it, things like that. So these are just some basics.
And whether or not you name your 5 gigahertz network with a different SSID.
Absolutely.
Well, if you have a crappy enough product, I guess that's necessary.
Yeah.
Like if there's a little Apple on it somewhere, I'm sure that's probably necessary.
And I'm 100% in agreement with you there. Now, while we need to serve wireless and serve networking gear to our clients who unanimously have decided to go the Apple route, that sure as hell doesn't mean we're going to let Apple be the backbone of our network. Right. Unquestionably, it's not an option. So, other than that, guys, what would you do? What advice would you give to integrators? Links, areas online that you'd send them to. For example, say networkingforintegrators.com, Jim's site.
Well, one of the things that I guess one of the reasons I started that site was kind of what you said. We're not dealing with a skyscraper full of offices or a stadium. And it seems like the networking trainings that are online, for the most part, are, 1,000 miles an hour. You're going to be able to build any networking product in the world ever. Well, we don't need that. We need we need the foundations at that level, but we get to stop at a certain point. And the terminology, if you don't know the terminology they're talking about, you got to go back, like, take one step forward, 3 steps back, learn this terminology, and then, oh, that's what they were talking about. And, you end up in this spiral where nothing's concrete because it's not presented in a good way. I've actually seen Control 4's, their online university, they have a advanced and an intermediate network class. It's videos. But it's actually good. It's the basis. It's just enough to say, this is what an IP address is. This is what a subnet mask is. Not just 255.255.255.0, type that in and hit OK. It's like, this is what it is. This is all you need to know about it. Next thing. I don't think there's enough of that for what we do. So that's kind of like I kind of went off the rails on my website with microtik stuff, and then lost sight of the basics that I wanted to do in the first place. But I think I'm going to kind of refocus on that. So if I could get some input on what real world people need, because the questions I get asked, I'm looking right now at my Google Analytics page for the website, and I've gotten hits from 216 different countries, and I have people asking me questions, and I'm just like, I have no idea what I couldn't even test what you're asking me, but I'm not getting kind of the real world questions that a tech in our field would be asking. You know what I mean? So if I could get some info on that, I would gladly put some more content on there.
Well, then by the end of this show, we're going to make sure that you've given folks a means of contacting you, whether it be through social media or direct email. We'll definitely give you that option. Chris, where would you send people online to learn?
Wow. Let's see. A couple different manufacturers have pretty well-written white papers. Ruckus has some really good white papers about comparisons about how they work in environments comparatively to having to shoot through different types of materials. The idea of having I don't know how much you guys know about wireless or how far we go into it, but like the idea that most things work off a dipole radiator, which is basically taking my finger and making a donut around it, which basically Jim would eat. Now, moving on from that, there's so many steps out, and there's signal this way, but there's nothing directly above or directly below. But the thing is, Wi-Fi and so forth is based on a game of catch. Like I throw out a signal, they throw it back, and let's face it, it's like a major league pitcher against a toddler.
Yeah.
So the major league pitcher is ripping these balls at him at 108 miles an hour. The toddler's catching it, and he sends back his little replies, which are acts. And acts are basically acknowledges, which is basically more or less this, I get it. Continue. So you keep getting blasted, but if the toddler throws back the ball and it doesn't make it to the pitcher's feet, he looks down and goes, well, you suck at this. I don't want to play anymore. And no more data goes back and forth anymore. And Ruckus had a great, white paper that showed how they were getting signals to go through certain mediums at certain distances and using less power by, instead of sending out your signal in every which way and trying to make these weird, like dropping your hands on both sides of a bathtub and trying to make ripples, like having something actually go to one point or another. So there was a great white paper there. I can't remember exactly what they listed as, but it was like, how do I make a lily pad jump, I think is what it was called. And that was a really useful one for figuring out how to deal with wireless interference.
Yeah.
But the one that, I can't remember where I read the other one. There was another great one that I read about the way that Wi-Fi works is much more like a hub rather than an actual router. Because
it's not much more like it absolutely is like a hub.
It's much more, I don't remember the whole paper, but like when I was reading it, I was trying to come up with better ways to explain it. And the way I decided to do it was, do you guys remember MASH, the TV show MASH? The beginning of MASH started out, you saw the big stick, and on the top of the stick were 4 speakers pointing every way, and it played Reveille. Well, Reveille talks to everybody, so that's like multicasting, because everybody's actually listening to that. And then after that, it starts going, Corporal Klinger, we want you to report to this. Corporal this, we want you to do that. Those things are no different than standard Wi-Fi, where it goes out every which way, and the other people go, well, you're not talking to me. I don't need to know that, and it just disregards it. But the signal still went every which way, and it still echoes and reflects and goes everywhere. And like I said, I can't remember exactly what that white paper was, but it was explaining about the concept of going everywhere versus trying to send it to one specific point, and the fact that since it's like you, now you, now you, now you, that's time division multiplication, TDMA, it's only one person talks at a time. So despite the fact you've only got your access point and all your devices, well, if you hear another access point in the same thing, guess what? Even though you're not on the same SSID, they all start with the same first packet. The first packet says, shut up, I'm speaking. And everyone else goes, ooh, it's his turn. And then that one talks, and the next one talks, and it goes round and round and round like round robin. So despite the fact you've got your own, SSID in your own devices, if you can hear someone else's, you have to mitigate their interference.
Oh, agreed. Yeah. That's actually going to take me backwards for a minute, just as far as, where I would steer people to get started. You could spend some time just on wireless alone, and please, for everybody's sake, learn the difference between co-channel and adjacent channel interference. Please, for everyone's sake, learn at least that.
One of the other things about people starting out kind of off the wireless topic is a Cat 5 tester is not a certifier.
No,
So
it is not.
if everybody could figure that out, that would be nice. Just because it says 1 through 8 doesn't mean it's working right.
Just because it says Wi-Fi certified doesn't mean it works right.
Right.
Well, guys, I think that probably covers quite a bit of area tonight. Unless you guys have something that you'd want to add to the discussion, this is certainly going to be an ongoing, hopefully a monthly show, as long as AVNation will have us. I'd love to have you guys back for future shows. There's no question about it. Chris, you're a handful, but we'd still love to have you back, of course. But I do want to give you guys an opportunity to share with folks where they might find you online. Jim, where they might be able to submit questions to you, things of that nature.
For me, I'm on Google+. I don't know if my name is showing up here anywhere. I think it probably just says Jim. But my email you can reach me at is jim@networkingforintegrators.com. That would be the easiest one for me to spell right now. There's also a little tab on the site on the homepage. You can say like request an article or something like that. It sends like a web form through, but I'm going to revamp that. But you can reach me there. Any questions, I'd be glad to attempt to answer. Most of the time I'm just asking Chris how to do it, so I just type it.
Well,
Awesome.
Anthony, we really left that out. You left out that Jim and I do co-work together, but you really didn't go how far into it our collaboration goes sometimes.
Right.
I'm glad you brought that up. I've heard a little bit about the Hep C redirect, which is something
that had nothing to do with Jim. Well, Jim helped a little bit, but that had nothing to do with Jim directly.
Okay.
I troubleshot that one. That's all.
So before we wrap this up, before you pin where we can find you online, Chris, how about you share with us the Hep C redirect?
Okay, Hep C redirect. Okay, a term you guys are going to hear every once in a while, which is kind of funny because people use it and they want to be like shockingly scary. This is mostly in the professional thing. They go, well, it's not PCI compliance. It's not PCI compliance. Oh, you get in trouble for PCI compliance. First of all, I stopped the guy mid-sentence and I go, do you even know what PCI stands for? And he keeps going, well, it's a federal regulation. I said, no, it's not a federal regulation. PCI stands for Payment Card Industries. So Payment Card Industries, if you process credit cards, you sign a form that states that you will apply certain rules to your network. You'll make sure that they are PCI compliant and that you don't use default passwords. You can't log into a router by typing 192.168.1.1 admin and get into the POS systems. You agree that you won't have your wireless devices available so the person can press reset on it. You set certain standards. So what happened was I worked on a job over in Leesburg, Virginia, which is about 45 miles away. When I got there, I saw the most egregious violations I'd ever seen in my life. First of all, they were using a FiOS router that was running their POS system, their back-of-house printers, and all of their back-of-house computers were all on that. Now, the wireless for that was being given out to the customers. So that is a direct violation of PCI compliance because now end users can get on your wireless network and scan traffic as it goes between your credit card processing and your payment systems. So they can literally just catch it right there and steal your identity. So this is a pretty big deal. So I'm throwing my temper tantrum telling them you can't do that. I start unplugging things. I go, okay, I don't know the password of this router. I just unplug the router and put another router in. As soon as I plug another router in, I realize there's still another wireless network. I go wandering around, and what do I find? I find a hijacked Airport Express on the other side of the restaurant with a hidden SSID that's encrypted. After a little bit of poking around, I realize that SSID is broadcasting across the road to somebody who's logged into their network constantly skimming traffic.
Oh.
So, of course, trying to be a professional, I unplug that from the system because, well, I'm trying to protect these idiots despite the fact they haven't paid yet. And I unplug it, get in there, reset it. I don't have an access point on me. I do have a 750 GL in my backpack. So that's now running their network while I try and figure out what's going on. So of course, they're telling me, hey, our printers work faster. The things are coming up in the kitchen quicker. Everything's working great. I said, that's fine and all, but we don't have any wireless, and you can't provide wireless like this. You need a real wireless system where it's firewalled between the guest network and your network, and you need things like terms of service. You need to have rate limits, and you need to set limitations on where people can and cannot go. So, they go, oh, well, that all sounds good. How much does that cost? I said, look, I don't work in sales. I'm a technician. I'm working for these guys. You need to talk to them. We'll have it all spec'd out, but it's Wednesday. If you pay, we'll be back Friday. Put it in. Sounds great. Sounds great. Well, of course, that's when you're talking to a technician. When it goes to sales and they start wanting money, it doesn't sound so great anymore, does it? Anyway, let's cover the basics. To get this job done was about $3,500. The minimum fine for a PCI violation is $50,000. The top end fine is $2 million. I don't know about you, but I don't have that sort of money lying around. So anyway, I readdress this Apple TV so they can use it. I'm sorry, this Airport Express so they can use it. And I tell them flat out, 2 days. 2 days, I'll be back. We'll put in a real wireless system, real firewalls. We'll have all the things, terms of service. You'll be good to go. 40 days pass, and they don't get back to us. We keep calling every day, trying to get hold of them, trying to get them on the phone. They won't pick up. So one day I get curious, I log into their router, and what do I see? But I see 45 devices on the wireless network. And there ain't no way there's 45 managers or owners on that network. So I look at that and I start going, okay, well, I've got to figure out a way to lock them out. So the first thing I do is I go, well, they're restaurant A. We'll just leave them nameless for the moment because I don't want to get sued. But I say, okay, let's take all of their traffic and send them to, say, Hooters.com as their notification page. So no matter where you try to go when you first log in, if you're not the back of house computers, you see Hooters.com. That's the only place you can go. Well, of course, I call up Jim. Jim, could you try this? Could you see if this works on your computer? He's like, well, it works sometimes, but it's not working 100%. So we start looking through. We try Hooters. We try Fridays. We find that Applebee's has a direct IP address, so that makes it much easier to do. So we make it Applebee's.com. So you log into anything at their network, you see Applebee's.com. Still, they don't call. Okay, well, what can I do to get their attention? So I call up Jim and I go, hey, I got an idea. Let's take their main web page. We'll put a white screen in the middle of it, and we'll put, we know you have a lot of choices when you go out to dinner, and we really appreciate you choosing, underline, the name of this restaurant. We're having a little trouble with our wireless network right now, so please have a drink on us. That might have cost him a little money, so of course the owner of the business said, Chris, you can't do that. So I said, all right, well, technically I own that router. They never paid for it. So I said, you know what, I got an idea, and we'll make sure that they call you back tomorrow morning. Log into my MikroTik, and I grab a little NAT rule, and I set it up so that any traffic gets natted to 8080. I then engage the proxy loop, and then, so basically as traffic goes into it, it gets turned to 8080, jumps over to the proxy, which immediately says, well, you can go to thegreenturtle.com, and that's it. Anywhere else, it just gets dumped. So it just keeps looping back to Green Turtle. I think that would get their attention.
No.
Not trying hard enough. Well, let's face it, it's a restaurant. Let's have a little fun with them. They haven't called back. It's been 45 days. Where do we set the redirect loop to? hepcnu.com. 9 a.m. the next morning, phone call. Hey, can you guys come out here? We're having some real problems with our network. I said, really? You're having real problems with your network? He said, yeah, our waiters are having a hard time logging. I said, your waiters? Now, mind you, I logged all the MAC addresses to begin with there, and none of the devices that actually belonged there saw that redirect. Only guests would see that redirect. Only devices I didn't know about. So, of course, he went, well, we're having some issues. I go, you're having issues with the fact your network hasn't gone down in 45 days. When you used to have to reboot it every day. I don't think that's your issue either. He goes, well, we've had some complaints with, I go, the fact that your customers keep seeing the Hep C website when they log in. And he goes, yeah, that would be it. And I said, we'll take your credit card number on the other line, and we'll be over tomorrow.
High pressure sales. And perfectly valid in this case.
I think that was probably the best way I could have handled it without actually involving, like, what's the joke about from Men at Work? Like, why'd you shoot him with a pellet gun? Well, it allows me to seriously aggravate the situation without actually changing the flow of history.
Yeah. So folks joining us, look at the power we have in our hands. When we control the packets, when we control how frames and bits and bytes move across that copper or across that wireless medium of air, look at the power that we hold in our hands. And with that power, obviously, comes great responsibility. Chris, where can people find you online, or where would you like people to reach out to you, assuming you would want them to?
Well, if you've got large quantities of tequila and a PayPal account, I'll usually take your emails at chris@rlcint.com or cnicholson@rlcint.com. RLC is, of course, Ryan's little company, my little kid you'll see running around every once in a while. And, basically, I sort of work a lot in tandem with Jim because I like to write a lot of code, and I try to come up with ideas to make things absolutely bulletproof, and then I hand it to Jim, and he just shoots it all full of Swiss cheese in a matter of seconds. I mean, it's kind of impressive how quickly he can break things I come up with.
I love that. Well, I know that you certainly helped me out when I was in a pickle as well, and for that I'm grateful. Guys, I'm super grateful that you joined us for this first show. It's been a hell of a lot of fun. I think that moving forward, there's a lot for us to learn, a lot for me to learn from you guys, from the listeners. We'd certainly urge you guys to find us at avnation.tv, look for the Power Over Ethernet or POE show, and let's see what comes of this. I personally can be reached at most likely Google Plus is where you'll find me. I'm Anthony Zotti, Z-O-T-T-I at Google Plus. You can also find me blogging periodically at AVNation. I've started submitting there, as well as my own little site, thegadgetranch.net. But yeah, lots to learn, and it's been a lot of fun, fellas.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Yeah, absolutely. I wish you guys good night.
Okay, bye-bye.